What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and I'm here to bring you a quick summary of the LVO top 8 players for the largest Warhammer 40k event, to my knowledge, that has ever been run, a 910-player super major at the Las Vegas Open, running this weekend, and the breakdown of the top 8 players who have qualified after 7 rounds of Warhammer 40,000, including 6 normal Swiss pair matches and 1 shadow round match that the players have to win in order to qualify for that top 8, is absolutely nuts. Now, I think going on into this meta game, we would be expecting a domination of Eldar and Chaos Space Marines. Instead, we get a little smattering of those factions, but also largely what is a pretty well-rounded representation of the meta game. Now, there were a couple things that made this happen, but first off, let's go down the list of the players who are undefeated currently. That being, in first place, Charlie Andre with Chaos Space Marines and Fulgur Piles with Eldari. So we do see the 2 top frontrunners of the metagame represented here. Sweet Lou playing Leagues of Votann, Ben Sherwin playing Black Templars, Matt Laura with Necrons, Daniel Olivas with Eldari, Richard Cozart with Astra Militarum, and Sam Pope with Tyranids. Now, there were a couple things that made this possible. We did have in that shadow round, which was paired with some exceptions, top to bottom placing, so the top players in the standings going into the 7th round played against the lowest players within the top 16. That ended up creating 2 mirror matches between Eldari and Necrons. Ben Sherwin and Zach Kerstetter was also a mirror match of Space Marines, 2 separate Space Marine supplements, however, in Ultramarines, Vanguard, and Spearhead that we've seen a lot of times before versus Black Templars. We might have seen a higher representation of those factions if we didn't get those mirror matches, but we also have seen some absolutely incredible upsets happen so far. And so before we get to the top 8 games, let's dive in and talk about some lists. Now, going from top to bottom on these final standings, the top lists I think are to be expected. Charlie Andre is playing what is essentially a normal Chaos Space Marine Slaves to Darkness detachment. It's got a bunch of Dark Communes, it's got a bunch of Accursed Cultists, 3 Chaos Lords, 3 units of Chosen. Interestingly, we do have a Chaos Land Raider instead of the normally ubiquitous Rhinos, and a Hellbrute, which is an interesting inclusion as well, alongside Celeste and the Blue Scribes to add some demon support, but otherwise this is a relatively normal Chaos Space Marine army that we would have seen a million times before. The same can largely be said of Fulgur Piles Eldari. It is an Incarn-led battle host detachment running an Outark Wayleaper, Fuegan the Fire Lord, a Spirit Zero with Fate's Messenger, supporting a big unit of Wraithguard, backed up by Night Spinners and utility units like Swooping Hawks and Warp Spiders. Things get interesting once we get to the 3rd place finisher, however. Sweet Lou playing Leagues of Votann, running 2 Brokir Iron Masters, as well as an Einhir Champion, leading a massive boat of Brokir Thunderkin. We have 1 unit of Hearthkin Warriors that can fill 2 Sagitaurs out of the 3 Sagitaurs in the army. We then have 1 unit of 5 Chthonian Berserks to fill the 3rd Sagitaur, alongside a Hekaton Land Fortress, 1 big brick of Einhir Hearthguard, and 3 units of Hernkin Pioneers. That's backed up by 3 max units of Brokir Thunderkin, 2 with Graviton Blast Cannons, 1 with SP Conversion Beamers. Just a lot of these dudes. Very efficient shooting that can come off the table edge out of Strategic Reserve and do some pretty serious damage. Ben Sherwin is running an absolutely fascinating Firestorm Assault Force detachment out of Black Templars. It's running an Apothecary Biologus with Forged in Battle to turn some dice rolls into 6s. High Marshal Helbrecht, a Judiciary with Champion of Humanity to ignore characteristic penalties, as well as an Emperor's Champion. Those 3 characters were leading 3 units of Primaris Sword Brethren. These guys hit like Mack trucks by themselves. With the inclusions of the characters, they hit even harder, and they all have access to Crucible of Battle for potentially +1 to wound in melee. We then have 4 units of Crusader Squads. These guys entirely kitted out with Melta-Guns, an Inferno Pistol on the Sword Brother, a Melta-Gun on the Special Weapon Marine, and a Multi-Melta on the Heavy Weapon Marine. Those guys were jumped into 2 Rhinos. So these Rhinos inside the Firestorm Assault Force are going to be able to advance and still shoot, thanks to all of their weapons being counted piloted as assault. They can then fire with the firing deck 2 multi-meltas out of the top of the Rhino, or disembark the units inside to fire a total of 8 total melta shots between the 2 Crusader squads, their Inferno pistols, melta guns, and multi-meltas. Those, if they are within 12 inches, which they probably should be because most of their weapons ranges are not that long anyway, are going to be +1 strength, meaning that those go up to strength 10, and within 6 inches can even get an additional +1 to wound. We then have an aggressor squad for that apothecary to jump into. Those guys are being ferried around by a Land Raider Redeemer, and we have 3 impulsors for the Primaris Sword Brethrens alongside 2 scout squads for utility. This army is absolutely lethal in both melee and close range shooting. It's very fast, and it has an enormous number of transports, which are already a super powerful unit archetype in 10th edition, and it's extremely difficult to deal with them and all of the units inside. The list name is very appropriately, but wait, there's more, because every time you kill one of these transports with the units inside, there are probably 2 or 3 to take its place afterwards. That moves us on to Matt Laura, who is coming off some pretty good results using Necrons recently, and he is continuing to use Necrons at the LVO, using a Hypercrypt Legion focused on a Monolith and massive bricks of Immortals. This list was running a Plasmancer and 2 Chronomancers alongside 2 Catan Shards, a Shard of the Nightbringer and a Shard of the Void Dragon. Those guys backed up by Illuminor Seraz to buff the Immortals, and Imhotep the Stormlord to gain some command points. We then had 3 units of 10 Immortals, 1 with Tesla Carbines and 2 with Gauss Blasters. These guys can then attach the Chronomancer. 1 unit, probably the Tesla unit, can attach the Plasmancer in order to get an enhanced access to sustained hits. We then have 2 units with Chronomancers, both of which are able to shoot and then move, allowing them to redeploy using Hypercrypt Legion's ability or using the Monolith Eternity Gate, fire, and then move into safety or move forward to steal objectives. And that this list is extremely maneuverable, especially alongside Cosmic Precision, which allows the units that are hyperphasing to jump even closer than screens would normally allow them, then using their Chronomancer moves after shooting to get onto objectives. This list is almost impossible to stop stealing your objectives away. And following up those big bricks, we had 6 Canoptic Scarab Swarms and 2 units of 3, a unit of Death Marks, 3 individual Locust Destroyers for utility, and that aforementioned Monolith. Because it has Deep Strike innately, it's able to redeploy using hyperphasing, pick up on the first battle round, and then drop immediately on your next turn. Then in the reinforcement step, pick up the Immortals that are already on the table and redeploy them into aggressive positions, then using the Chronomancer moves. So as long as the Monolith survived the first turn, which it is almost guaranteed to because LVO is using player-placed terrain, and so you can guarantee that you have a line of sight blocker to protect the Monolith, it's almost always going to be able to put Immortals into your deployment zone or onto your objectives on the bottom of the first round. That's all backed up by the 2 Catan Shards that can dominate the center of the table, being ridiculously difficult to kill, and all together makes an incredibly effective list. We then had Daniel Olivas playing Eldari, another relatively standard variety of Eldar. This one focusing a little bit more on combined arms units, bringing 2 Fire Prisms and 2 units of Shadow Specters, as well as the normal allotment of units like Wraithguard and Night Spinners. Fairly standard stuff, however, but things get spicy in the bottom 2 of the top 8, and these are kind of why I wanted to make this video. Richard Cozart is coming registering Astra Militarum, and this list is an absolute spice show, and one of them that I did not expect to go undefeated in 7 rounds of Warhammer 40k, but I am here for it, and I am here rooting for Richard Cozart to go all the way with this army. This is an Astra Militarum army taking Gaunt's Ghost, Lord Solar Leontis, and a platoon command squad. Pretty standard allotment so far, alongside a single infantry squad, 2 Chimeras that are going to be ferrying 2 Bulgrin squads, 3 men apiece up the table, 1 Basilisk to shock enemy infantry, add a little bit of indirect fire, alongside 1 Wyvern to support that as well and clear out light infantry, 2 Cyclops demolition vehicles to act as super cheap utility units, 2 Lehman Russ, 1 Demolisher, and 1 Vanquisher, alongside 2 Scout Sentinels to support them, a Calidus Assassin for utility, and last but certainly not least, a Storm Sword super heavy battle tank. For those who don't know, the Storm Sword is a classic Baneblade chassis profile, 24 wounds at T13 with a 2+ save. Already a pretty good profile, but the ranged attacks on this dude are absolutely nuts, including a Storm Sword siege cannon which fires D6+6 blast shots at strength 16, AP 4 for D6+2 damage. That's alongside its 4 las cannons and 5 sets of twin heavy bolters. Now the big benefit of that cannon is its concussive wave, which allows it to deal D3 mortal wounds to units within 3 inches of the target after after shooting. This includes the target itself, and while it only triggers on the roll of a 5+, it does force your opponent to spread out a little bit more than they would like to, and can potentially deal some nice automatic damage to whatever it shoots with its big siege cannon. With Lord Zolar Leontis in the list alongside Scout Sentinels to buff this guy, his ballistic skill of 4+ is relatively deceiving because he can make his attacks a lot more reliable than you would normally expect. And with a T13 2+ save profile that's almost permanently benefiting from cover, he is difficult to kill. And if your opponent overcommits into killing him, the Leman Russ and other units in the army can usually follow up and try to reciprocate. Now, this list is lacking a lot of the normal staples we see in Astra Militarum, several units of fast infantry like Kadishan jungle fighters inside those Chimera dedicated transports, but apparently it's working out for the Astra Militarum, and my hope is that we see them on stream in its games today, and I'm kind of hoping it goes all the way. Last but certainly not least, we also have Tyranids in the top 8. A little surprising, but it is an unending swarm, an army list that very few armies in the metagame are prepared to deal with right now, since many of them are kitting to deal with heavier armor. If you don't have the correct volume of attacks to deal with the endless swarm, it's going to run you over, and that has happened 7 times so far this weekend. This is Samuel Pope running the detachment, taking Death Leaper, a Hive Tyrant, a Neuro Tyrant, 1 unit of 20 Gargoyles, 1 unit of 20 Hormagaunts, alongside 4 units of 20 Termagants, 1 Biovore, 3 Exocrines to add some backline shooting, a Standard Lictor alongside 2 Neurolictors, a unit of Venomthropes to grant the army stealth, and last but certainly not least, a Neurogaunt unit to add another cheap Gaunt Carpet. An army packing the massive volume of objective control that the Unending Swarm has is very difficult to score objectives on, especially against the canny player who doesn't give you too many of the Gaunt units to chew on at a time and retains some of them in the back to follow up and steal the objectives away. The inclusion of the Exocrines is a little prophetic. Not only are Exocrines very efficient in the Tyranid army, but they are also very good at killing things that are generally very good at killing Termagants. You can imagine heavy infantry units like Sword Brethren or Chosen or Aggressors can kill tons and tons of Termagants, and what you don't want to see them do is be able to do that multiple times. And as soon as they are out in the open, Exocrines will just pick up those units immediately. 3 wound heavy infantry are their very favorite food. They're also good at chipping damage into large targets, but they have to roll to 5s to wound them, generally speaking, so it's a little bit less consistent. Although with the Neurolictor auras, it can turn on the damage output of this army quite a bit. And alongside the Termagants running massive numbers of Spine Fists, they do have a lot of twin-linked weapons that could potentially be benefiting from the +1 to wound as well. The Neuro Tyrant also gives you that 1 turn of -1 leadership battle shock checks thanks to Shadow and the Warp. That can also turn on the Neurolictor aura or muck with your opponent's scoring, and scoring domination is the name of the game for the Unending Swarm. Very cool to see Tyranids go as far as they have, and the interesting question is going to be whether or not the SKU can make it through the top 8, but I'm certainly rooting for them into a field of Eldar and Chaos Space Marines. Now, speaking of the field, let's talk about the pairings of the top 8 rounds real quick. At the time of recording, the games are going to go live in a couple of hours. They will be streamed live over on the War Games Live channel. Please go check them out if you haven't already. I will drop a link down in the video description to the stream. The games are being seeded, so top placing is going to be playing the bottom placing within that top 8. That gives us Charlie Andre versus Sam Pope, Chaos Space Marines versus Tyranids there. That gives us going from top to bottom, Daniel Olivas playing Eldari versus Ben Sherwin playing the Black Templars Firestorm, Richard Kozar playing Astra Militarum versus Folger Piles playing Eldari. I think that's going to be a little bit of a tough one for the Storm Sword, but maybe it's going to be able to get to grips with a Wraithguard unit and knock them out before they blow everybody up. Charlie Andre is playing Chaos Space Marines into the Tyranids. I'm a little bit worried about the Tyranids' ability to survive massive numbers of Accursed Cultists, but they're also very good at killing Termagants in melee, which is where you have to interact with them. Matt Laura, last but not least, is playing Necrons into Sweet Lou's Leagues of Votann. Very excited about the top 8 games for LVO, and mostly excited about the diversity that we saw in the top 16. While we did see a couple of mirror matches knock out some of the more populous armies in that top 16, the top 8 is looking pretty representative. 2 Eldar and 1 Chaos Space Marines. While I might have expected to see more Chaos Space Marines make it to the top, I think that people are slowly but surely figuring out how to deal with them. But inclusions like Astra Militarum and Tyranids, as well as some really good showings from armies like Grey Knights and Adeptus Sororitas in that top 16 going into the Shadow rounds, I think goes to show you that in a lot of ways, the best general wins a lot of the time in Warhammer 40,000 right now. So go watch the streams, I'm definitely going to be talking more about the final results of LVO 2024 as we get some. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.